Painting is an interesting thing because it's one of the few things in life that I'm aware of that you can actually get better at as you get older. We have, I think, a completely misplaced reverence for things made early in one's career, the early work, the obsession with the early work. Sometimes it's true and often it's not true. I feel much more, not just proficient, but just better now. Everything else in life has gone to hell, but painting just gets better and better. I'm David Salle. What does influence really mean? It used to mean in a very clear, demonstrable way, you're making something in someone else's style. I remember reading an interview with Larry Rivers, of all people, said if someone made, he was talking about the downtown scene, people around the 9th Street scene, said if someone made a Clyfford Still, everybody knew it, because Clyfford Still's style was so instantly recognizable. And Still is someone I would also cite as an influence, although it would be absurd to try to make paintings like Clyfford Still is. How could one not hold up Clyfford Still as a model of something, some kind of rectitude and existential presence? And the other side of the influence equation would be Jackson Pollock, whose work also doesn't look anything like mine. But as I said earlier, the compositional all-overness, the dynamic compositional energy in a Pollock drip painting is something I understand instinctively and by training from a very young age, and I have always identified with and I always feel congruent with. There's a famous story about Frank Stella, the young Frank Stella, when he was a painting student of Stephen Green's at Princeton. He said that he really wanted to paint like Velázquez. Velázquez was his favorite artist. Since that was simply out of the question, he painted black stripes instead. I thought that was a wonderful way of putting it, because the result of the things that influence us when they're digested and reconstituted in one's own work can look very different, if not to say opposite, from the kind of inciting incident. In congruence with the question about influences, the one Manet painting which I keep going back to over and over again, I've seen, I don't know how many times, many dozens of times, is the Olympia, which is certainly one of the most famous paintings ever painted, endlessly dissected by legions of scholars. There's something about the painting that's unaccountable, and that is its present tenseness. And it's not just because it's realistic, it's not more realistic than a lot of other paintings. Olympia is like, I don't know, 10 or 20 chords being struck simultaneously. It's like a wall of sound, to borrow another metaphor. And the face of the model looks back at the viewer with certainly one of the most complex expressions in the history of portraiture. If someone came from another planet and they said, what is this thing, these rectangles, we keep seeing everywhere, tell us about this. If you had to try to describe what painting is to someone from another galaxy, you really would just need that painting. The teacher-student relationship is tied up with timing. So the old adage about the teacher comes when the student's ready, all that stuff, is actually relevant, because you could have had the same lessons at a time when they wouldn't have had any impact. But I was very fortunate in meeting, when I was 9 years old, with this woman named Betty Dickerson in Kansas, who had a private art school. Betty was thoroughly versed in all the tenets of modernism. So what we really did, in addition to drawing from the model, which is the standard course, we did color theory. We had the Albers color theory books. So at the age of 10, 11, 12, I was diagramming Veronese paintings by Titian and Tintoretto. The emphasis really was on how pictures are constructed and how the method of their construction is tied up with their meaning. These are lessons that seem to have skipped whole generations now. I count myself very lucky to have met her at just the right time in life. Then when I was ready to go to college, I was also very lucky in discovering, completely by chance, in the most random way, discovering there was a new school about to open in California called the California Institute of the Arts. So at the age of 17, I got on the airplane and went to California, went to LA, where I met John Baldessari, who I worked with for the next 5 years, and we became quite close friends. I worked in John's studio, and we stayed very close friends until he died. And I'm sure that whatever I've done since has been somehow tied up with reconciling those two trajectories ever since. I do remember when I was a teenager, I don't remember when exactly, there was a show of Richard Diebenkorn drawings from the model that I saw. I think it was in Kansas City. That work, which I think was really wonderful, it's definitive work of its type. It's really great, and at the same time accessible enough and close enough to one's own time that I could sort of imagine what it was like to do that work and to be the person who made that work. And that was, I don't think it was the inciting incident, but it was, let's say, it was a fortifying one. I did collaborate for a long time. I don't know how long, maybe 10 or 12 years. 7 very intense, important years with the choreographer Karole Armitage, who I rank as one of the great artists of the second half of the 20th century. I think she was absolute genius. At some point, it was in 1985, we met for the first time, and she immediately asked me, I don't even know why, asked me if I would contribute a set and a costume for a ballet she had just been commissioned to make by American Ballet Theatre. She was certainly not alone in this, but in her generation, in her cohort, she was working with music in a way which was different from the other people who had descended from the Merce Cunningham tradition, because Karole had been one of the star dancers of Merce Cunningham Company. To have come out of that universe in which, as you all know, Merce did not choreograph to music. It was a very radical development in the history of choreography. So Karole returned to using music in a deliberate, synchronistic way. So the way we would work was to start with the music. When Karole would choose the music, we would listen to it endlessly in the car, individually, and playing it over and over again. And I would simply start to imagine, images would occur to me. What about this? What about that? And I would throw out these ideas, and Karole would say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And so it went. We would develop a certain shared vocabulary of responses. When I hear this passage, I see X. And Karole would say, oh, that could be useful, and then she would work with it or not. So the process was responding to the music, each in our own disciplines. And then, again, unlike Merce, we worked very, very carefully to see if these things would coalesce into the whole. We were very lucky. We were just on the same wavelength from the beginning. Very few people get to experience this kind of synchronicity. So it was another great stroke of luck in my life. But as long as it lasted, that was an incandescent moment. I wouldn't trade it for anything. There's so many great books, obviously, that one could cite. Again, it's partly a question of when you read them. If you read Catcher in the Rye when you're 13, as I did, as almost everyone did, you never forget it. But that's not really something I would even cite as important or as an influence. I mean, it's important in the sense of it kind of shows you a life attitude or a way to think about life. But maybe a more concrete influence, although it's hard to say exactly what the influence is the Master Margarita by Bulgakov, which is, I mean, certainly one of the great masterpieces of 20th century literature, one of the greatest books in 20th century. Bulgakov never expected his book to be read by a single person. He had no way of expecting the book would ever be published. He wrote it anyway. So when you read the book and you see the degree to which he pushed himself in these scenes of torment or these scenes of hilarity, every single scene is wrung out. Whatever is in the scene, it's wrung out of it to the last drop. It's something I find not just inspiring, but it's like it's hard to even explain it. And again, if we're trying to describe our civilization to someone from another galaxy, and they say, well, what is it? What is it you people do here? I mean, we point to Bulgakov as like one example. That's an interesting question. And sometimes you stay with the original impulse, even if you know it in fact ruins the painting. Someone has come to the studio when a painting was in progress, or when I thought it was finished, and they would say, well, that really works except for this. We just take that out. And then, so that one can do one or two things. You can say, fuck you, it's staying, or you can take it out. And I've done both. It comes in and out of focus. I remember going to art schools in the 80s and seeing stuff that looked like my stuff. And then I didn't for a while, and then I would hear from other people who were teaching and say, all the kids in the class are doing some version of you. I thought, really, I didn't know. And then it would go away for 10 years, and then it would come back again. I don't consider that to be an influence exactly. That's just the weather. Influence is another matter. Influence implies understanding. And I think the understanding has been in short supply. And there are people who I know well who are so celebrated, but are they understood? Is their work understood? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. I don't think there's very much understanding in this art world of ours. I think it has always been in short supply, and it's been dwindling. And it's something that I'm not very sanguine about it. I think it's a pity. No one ever takes your advice, weirdly enough. I mean, I shouldn't say never. I have a young friend now who, maybe she's my friend because she takes my advice, but she was just very open to my particular kind of analysis of how paintings work, and she listened, and it's working out beautifully for her. But most people don't take your advice, so I think I'll just say good luck.